The morning they hammered the sold sign into the ground, old Samuel Hartley stood at his fence and watched 50 years of his life slip through his fingers like dry soil. He didn't cry, not right then. A man who has buried a wife, raised children who moved away, and worked the same earth every single day for half a century learns to hold his grief the way he holds a plow, steady, quiet, and deep. But when the young man from the bank climbed back into his shiny car and drove off down the gravel road, Samuel finally let his shoulders fall. Everything he had ever known and loved, everything he had built with his own two hands, now belonged to somebody else. The farm sat at the edge of a little town called Willow Bend, tucked into a green valley where the mornings came in slow and the evenings smelled of hay and wood smoke. Samuel had been born in the farmhouse. He'd taken his first steps in that kitchen, married his sweetheart Eleanor under the great oak tree in the north field, and buried her beneath a little hill where the wildflowers grew thick every spring. Every fence post, every furrow, every crooked board in that old barn held a memory. And now, because of 3 bad harvests, a mountain of medical bills from Eleanor's final illness, and a body too old to work the way it once had, it was all being taken away. The people in town felt sorry for him in the distant way that busy people do. Poor old Samuel, losing the farm at his age, what a shame. But feeling sorry and doing something are 2 very different things, and nobody quite knew what could be done. So they said their kind words, and they shook their heads, and they went on with their lives. Samuel packed his few belongings into a borrowed truck and moved into a small rented room above the hardware store in town. From his little window, he could just make out the top of the great oak tree on his old land, far off across the fields. He'd sit there in the evenings and look at it and remember. The new owners arrived a few weeks later. They were a young family, a man named Daniel, his wife Rachel, and their 2 small children. City folks by the look of them, pale and soft-handed and clearly in over their heads. Daniel had lost his job when the factory closed, and they'd sunk every last dollar they had into buying this cheap, run-down farm, betting everything on a fresh start they had no earthly idea how to build. Within a month, it showed. The crops they planted came up thin and yellow. The old tractor died, and they couldn't afford to fix it. The well pump broke. Rachel started lying awake at night, listening to her husband pace the floor, both of them wondering if they had made the worst mistake of their lives. Now, a bitter man might have taken some grim satisfaction in watching the strangers who bought his land struggle to keep it. But Samuel Hartley was not a bitter man. Instead, something in his old heart ached for that young family floundering out there on the soil he loved. So one bright morning he pulled on his boots, walked the 3 miles out from town, and knocked on the door of the house that used to be his. Daniel answered, wary and tired. Samuel took off his cap, held it in his weathered hands, and said simply, "Name's Samuel. I used to farm this land. I don't want a thing from you, but if you'll have me, I'd be glad to lend a hand. This old dirt and I, we understand each other." For a long moment, Daniel just stared at him. Then, too exhausted and too desperate to say no, he stepped aside and let the old man in. And so began the most unlikely friendship Willow Bend had ever seen. Every morning Samuel walked out to the farm, and he taught that young family everything he knew. He showed Daniel which fields drained well and which held water, where the frost settled first, how to read the sky for rain. He showed Rachel how to tend a kitchen garden that would feed a family through the winter. He got that dead tractor running again with nothing but a wrench and 40 years of stubbornness. He taught the 2 children the names of every bird that came to the feeder and how to gentle the nervous old milk cow. Slowly, under Samuel's patient hands, the farm began to breathe again. The crops greened up, the barn got mended, and the young family that had been drowning at last began to find their feet. But Samuel never once went near the great oak tree in the north field. The children noticed it. that huge old tree, older than the farmhouse itself, standing alone in the field with a small worn bench beneath it. Whenever the little girl, Lily, ran toward it, Samuel would gently call her back. "Not there, little one," he'd say softly. "That tree's got secrets. Best let it keep them." And he'd say no more. The seasons turned. A year passed, then another. The old farmer became like a grandfather to those two children, and like a father to Daniel, who had lost his own long ago. The family that had bought Samuel's land out from under him had, without ever meaning to, given him back the one thing he thought he'd lost forever: a place to belong and people to love. Then, one autumn, Samuel fell ill. It came on the way it does with the very old, quietly and all at once. Daniel and Rachel brought him out to the farm and set up a bed in the front room, the very room where Samuel had been born, and they cared for him day and night as if he were their own blood. And on his last clear evening, with the golden light of sunset pouring through the window, Samuel took Daniel's hand and said the thing he had been holding on to for so long. "Under the oak," he whispered, "in the north field. Dig beneath the roots on the east side. There's something there. Been there 30 years. It was always meant for whoever loved this land enough to stay." He smiled then, a tired, peaceful smile. "You stayed. Both of you. You stayed." Samuel Hartley passed away that night in the house where his life began, surrounded by a family that was not his own by blood, but surely was his own by love. They buried him beside his Eleanor, beneath the little hill where the wildflowers grew thick, and the day after the funeral, with the whole grieving family gathered round, Daniel took a shovel out to the great oak tree in the north field. He dug beneath the roots on the east side, just as Samuel had said, and about 3 feet down the shovel struck metal. It was an old rusted strong-box. Daniel lifted it out of the dark soil, his hands trembling, and pried open the lid. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a thick bundle of letters, a small photograph of Samuel and Eleanor as a young couple standing beneath that very oak, and a stack of cash, nearly $40,000, saved up dollar by dollar over a lifetime of hard work. On top of it all was a letter written in Samuel's careful hand and dated years before he'd ever met them. It was addressed simply, "To whoever loves this land." Rachel read it aloud, her voice breaking, as the family stood beneath the great oak in the fading light. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and this land belongs to you now. My Eleanor and I could never have children of our own. The Lord didn't see fit to bless us that way. So we made a promise to each other long ago under this tree. We saved what we could every year, and we buried it here, not for us, for the future, for whatever family would one day come to this place and love it the way we did. We knew we'd never meet you, but we wanted you to know that you were never farming alone. Every seed you plant, we planted first. Every dream you have for this place, we dreamed it too. This money is for the farm, to keep it alive, to keep it in the hands of good people. Take care of the land, and it will take care of you. And now and then, when the evening comes on soft and gold, sit beneath this old oak and think of the 2 old souls who loved this ground before you. That's all we ask. With love, from the people who came before, Samuel and Eleanor Hartley." Nobody said a word for a long time. Rachel was weeping. Daniel held the letter to his chest, and the 2 children stood there in the golden light, looking up at the great oak that had kept its secret for 30 years. The secret that a childless old couple buried a fortune in the earth, not for themselves, but for strangers they would never live to meet. The family used the money to save the farm. They paid off their debts, fixed everything that was broken, and made that land more beautiful than it had ever been. And they placed a new bench beneath the great oak, a fine one with a brass plate that read, "For Samuel and Eleanor, who loved this land first and love it still." Every evening, when the sun went down soft and gold over Willow Bend, one of them would go and sit beneath that old tree just as Samuel had asked. and they raised their children and their children's children to always know the story of the old farmer who lost his land and gave them everything anyway. Because Samuel Hartley taught that town one final lesson buried deep in the earth beneath an old oak tree, that the truest kindness isn't the kind you live to see rewarded. It's the kind you plant in the dark, trusting that someone, someday, will find it, and it will bloom.